night, August 9th. Remember Lot's wife. Luke 17:32. We believe there are some now who need to have their attention called to the antitype of this typical incident referred to by our Lord. Quite a number are disposed to sympathize and fraternize with those who have come under divine condemnation. We are told by St. Jude that the destruction of Sodom was set forth as an example or type. Those who assume to be more gracious or long-suffering than the Lord make of themselves opponents, who instead of being students of the principles of righteousness, attempt to be judges and teachers of Jehovah. The proper attitude of heart accepts God's decisions as not only wiser, but more just than our own. Consequently, when we see any who have enjoyed the light of present truth abandoned by the Lord and led into outer darkness, we are to conclude that before being thus abandoned, there must have been in them an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. Reprint 5948.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're really getting into something quite focused, quite powerful. It all centers on this one command. Remember Lot's wife. The source is a Spiritual Reflection, Songs of the Night, August 9, reprint 5948 specifically. And our goal here really is to unpack what's, well, a pretty challenging view on judgment, divine decisions, and, those subtle ways faith can be tested. It's not just an old story. The source calls it an example, a type even, that has real weight for how we think about spiritual truth right now. It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And it connects right away to Luke 17:32, obviously, but also brings in St. Jude. Jude points to Sodom's destruction specifically as, an example or type. So like you said, this isn't just history. We're exploring a really nuanced take on obedience, and maybe even more, our basic attitude towards what the source calls divine decrees. It definitely challenges where our sympathies might naturally fall.
Right. And that's where it gets immediately provocative, because it notes how, quite a few people are disposed to sympathize with those facing divine condemnation. That feels natural almost. But then it says, hold on, if you assume to be more gracious than the Lord, you're actually setting yourself up as an opponent, not a student of the principles of righteousness. That's a pretty radical way to frame compassion in this specific context.
It is, a complete shift, really. It forces that question, what does it mean to be a student of the principles of righteousness? The force is very direct here. It argues that proper attitude of heart accepts God's decisions as not only wiser, but more just than our own. So connecting the dots, it suggests our very human feeling of pity in certain situations could actually be seen as, opposition. Like we're trying to be judges and teachers of Jehovah instead of just learning.
Which leads to maybe the most startling point in the whole piece. It says, when we see someone who once had the light of present truth, but is then abandoned by the Lord, led into outer darkness, we shouldn't jump to questioning God's decision.
Okay.
Instead, and this is the kicker, the source concludes that before that abandonment, there must have been in them an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God.
Wow. So it completely flips the perspective.
Exactly. It shifts the whole focus.
Right. It moves it away from, external actions or what looks like divine severity and points straight to an internal state. It's suggesting the root cause isn't God withdrawing grace arbitrarily, but an internal evil heart of unbelief that caused the person to depart first.
A departure from the living God, as it puts it.
Precisely. So it's less about judging the outcome and more about understanding that underlying spiritual principle. It's about an internal erosion of faith.
Okay, so let's step back for a second. What's the core takeaway here from this source? We've hit on this surprising idea that sympathy can sometimes look like opposition, and that the real issue, fundamentally, is this internal evil heart of unbelief.
Leading to departure.
Which leaves us, and you listening, with a really challenging thought, I think. How does this source's insistence on accepting divine decisions as wiser and more just sit with, our modern ideas about compassion, or even critical thinking? Is there a line where our empathy needs to yield to divine judgment? And maybe, how could unbelief show up subtly even when you think you're just trying to be more gracious?
And building on that, what does it practically mean for you to be a student of the principles of righteousness when faced with judgments that seem maybe harsh to our eyes? How might this particular understanding from our source shift your own view on truth, accountability, and what belief really entails? Definitely gives us a lot to chew on.